Hello, everyone, and welcome to day 3 of Mindful Living Week. My name is Kaylee Isaacs. I'm the founder of the Awake Network and the producer of Mindful Living Week. And today we're exploring the theme of body. And in this session, we're going to explore movement, exercise, and social connection with Dr. Kelly McGonigal, who is a health psychologist and lecturer at Stanford University, as well as the author of several books, including the international bestseller, The Willpower Instinct, as well as her latest book, The Upside of Stress. You might also know Dr. McGonigal from her popular TED Talk, How to Make Stress Your Friend, which happens to be one of the most viewed TED Talks of all time. So thank you so much for joining us, Dr. McGonigal.
Well, thank you for having me here, and I am so excited to be talking about this topic today.
Yeah, am I allowed to say that this is the topic that you are going to dive into for your new book?
Yes, and so the book has been written, at least in its first version. I'm in the middle of revision now. This is my first public conversation about this topic. I'm so eager to share what I learned in researching this book. I teach group fitness, I teach group yoga. I'm passionate about movement, all forms of movement, walking, dance, yoga, sports, anything that people do that connects them to their bodies and connects them to community. But this is the first time I'm actually sort of diving in a more public way about this thing that's played such an important role in my life. So I hope to share that with our viewers today.
Yeah, it's very exciting. I've really respected your work on willpower and stress and how you've just gone deep into the research and then brought the subjects to life in a way that is really relatable. So I'm very excited to hear about what you have to say on movement.
Great. Let's go.
Yeah.
Good.
Maybe start off by telling us just a little bit about movement and the effect that it can have on our mood and well-being.
Yeah, so I will tell you about something that is called the feel better effect in the science. And it's something that really surprised me, that it didn't shock me, but until I looked into the science, I didn't realize how reliable this feel better effect is. That when people go from being inactive, like sitting, lying down, doing nothing, to any sort of physical movement, whether it's walking or Tai Chi, like literally anything that involves moving your body, their moods tend to change in a very specific way. And it's not just going from sort of feeling not good to feeling better, even though it's called the feel better effect. It actually seems to move people from a place of feeling less energized and less hopeful to feeling more optimistic and more hopeful. And it's a very specific effect no matter what type of movement you do. And if it's okay, I'll actually take a step back and explain how psychologists think about mood so that we can better understand what this hyper-specific effect, feel better effect is. And if you think about mood, psychologists typically characterize it as having 2 different dimensions. There's how much energy you have. Are you exhausted? Are you depleted? Are you tired? And also how positive or negative your feeling state is. So you can be very low energy and negative, and that would be like being depressed. You can be energized and strongly negative, and that might be like anger or really intense fear or anxiety. A lot of physical activation, heart rate pounding, but negative feeling states. You can have lower energy but positive feeling states. That might be feeling calm or content or relaxed. And then you have this quadrant of high energy, high positive. And those are emotions like being elated, being excited, being hopeful, being inspired. And that is the quadrant in which movement tends to bring people no matter where they start. So if you start out low energy and negative, you're feeling depressed, or you're feeling really bored and hopeless, it starts moving you up in that direction to the high positive, high energy. If you start out really high energy but negative, like you're feeling so anxious or so frustrated and angry, it just puts you over into the high energy but positive state. If you're feeling kind of calm and relaxed, it moves you off in the direction of being more engaged, ready to do something with those positive states and engage with the world. And I think that is so fascinating. The studies show that this is true whether you are in shape or out of shape physically. It's true whether you sort of are in the laboratory walking on a treadmill, or you're out in nature walking in a wonderful park. There's something about just going from being inactive to active that resets your chemistry and resets your attitude in a way that gives you access to a state of, what I've been thinking of as embodied optimism. So that's one of the strongest things that you will see in the scientific literature. And I think that if you know, pay attention in your own life, you'll notice how that might be true. There's a reason when people are feeling upset or frustrated or despairing that going for a walk can literally change the way that you feel about your life. And this is so different than I think the way we often talk about movement when we talk about it as like sort of exercise. And if you ask people, you know, how do you think exercise will feel? People will say things like, oh, I don't have the energy for it. It's be exhausting, it'll be boring, it'll be uncomfortable. And one of the reasons I like using the word movement instead of exercise is it can sometimes take away some of those negative assumptions we have that we will feel worse after we exercise instead of what actually happens. As long as you're in control, as long as you're, you know, just like there's not someone behind you with a whip saying, run faster, run faster. You know, when you choose your movement, you listen to your body, you get the feel better effect.
I think it's a common sense that we feel like we should exercise and we know that it's good for us. But there's this idea that it's hard. And so are there certain types of movement that are more beneficial to us if we really exert ourselves running, and we might get the runner's high versus, you know, going for a slow walk?
You know, so it's interesting. There do seem to be very specific effects of different types of movement. So it kind of depends on what you want to experience and what's going on with your body and your mind. So there is some evidence that very high intensity exercise will lead to a stronger endorphin rush. That's not particularly surprising. But if at the same time you're going to injure yourself, or it's going to be so unpleasant to push yourself that hard that you spend the whole time, you know, asking yourself, why am I doing this? You may still get the endorphin rush, but it's a different kind of context. So, you know, one of the things that I'm trying to unpack is to recognize that it's not just movement, but it's where you move and who you move with and why you move that can really shape the effects that movement has on your mindset or on your happiness. Some of the things I would think about is not just how hard you're working, but are you taking time to be with yourself, or are you moving in communities and with other people? And that can have a very different sort of effect on your mind and on your well-being. Also, the place where you move. There is research that for most people, exercising outdoors really amplifies the feel better effect and has a slightly different effect on the brain than exercising indoors. That it's more effective at quieting the kind of rumination, the kind of like the thoughts that we feel like we can't really control and we're trying to escape sometimes when we choose to move or to exercise. That fMRI studies, brain imaging studies, have actually shown that when you spend time outdoors in movement, like going for a walk or maybe doing yoga outdoors, that it's more effective at quieting the mind than doing the same sort of movements indoors or in a really busy sort of outdoor area, like walking along a highway. So there's so many different, those are just a few examples. And one of the things that I'm always encouraging people to do is to put themselves in different movement contexts, to try out different movement forms, and really pay attention to the effect that it has, not just on your body, and certainly not just on the things we usually track, like, you know, how many calories have you burned, or the sort of things that often the fitness industry will tell you you should be paying attention to. And I think there's a whole other category of things we should be paying attention to instead. Like, how do you feel? And how do you feel about the people in your life? Like when you finish this movement session and you go back home and you run into your kids or your spouse, what kind of person are you in that moment? Because we know that movement can actually predispose you to be better able to connect to the people that you care about. But that's going to be true if you did a type of movement that really works with you and your body and your life.
Why is that? Why does movement help us to connect better with others?
Well, so different types of movement can do this in different ways. I'll tell you about a few of what I think are the most interesting. I think, you know what, I'll actually start with what was to me the most surprising. So one of the things that I explored in researching this book is the runner's high, because it's just like, it's the epitome of the mood benefits of exercise. And I'm not a runner. I pretty much would choose almost anything over running. It's just not anything that I've ever trained for. But when I talk to runners, I hear so consistently people describing the sense of feeling inspired, of feeling at ease, of feeling powerful, of feeling at peace. It's like an exaggerated version of that feel better effect, the embodied optimism. And there's quite a bit of research looking at what's happening physiologically to get that sort of runner's high and what is required physically to get into that state. And it's not specific just to running. It's basically any type of continuous movement where you're getting your heart rate up, but you're not going breathless. So I'm experiencing that when I dance. I'm experiencing that in a strong flow yoga class. There are many ways you can do it: cycling, hiking. Basically, you're moving continuously, but you're not pushing yourself so hard that you're struggling to breathe. So that state, people going in sort of a moderate run, it seems to release chemicals in the brain that aren't the endorphin rush that we usually associate with the runner's high. It actually seems to be driven by a class of neurochemicals called endocannabinoids. And if that sounds familiar, the cannabinoids part, it's because it's related to cannabis. And these are the same chemicals that cannabis or marijuana or dark chocolate actually target in the brain. So when people are getting a runner's high or a dancing high or a cycling high or a hiking high, what they're really experiencing is this increase in chemicals that are very similar to the sort of psychological state you might get from a mild buzz, in that they produce these feelings of peace and they produce these feelings of sort of everything being all right in the world. And what surprised me as I dug into this research is, okay, so it's like the don't worry, be happy chemicals, how it's often described by researchers. But I kept digging a little bit deeper, because one of the things I noticed is that runners would often say, not just that they felt good, but that they felt connected to everyone and everything. They would talk about feeling loving after a run. I was like, loving, right? That's not an endorphin rush. What does it mean that after you run, you feel more loving and open to others? And I started looking at the research on endocannabinoids and social functioning. And it turns out that endocannabinoids are also really important for helping people bond with others and experience social rewards. In fact, endocannabinoids are actually critical for enjoying the company of other people. And there's all sorts of interesting research that if you give people drugs that block the brain's natural endocannabinoid system, they don't enjoy connecting with their children, or they don't enjoy connecting with strangers, new social partners. And it seems like one of the things that's happening when we engage in continuous movement, not just running, but that we're getting this sort of chemical rush that maybe sort of evolutionarily speaking is there to help us just continue to move and feel good about it so we can stay engaged, but has this really interesting side effect of helping us connect with others. So you're in this state flooded with endocannabinoids, and maybe if you have a running group or a running partner, you feel really close and connected to them, or you're taking a dance class or doing a yoga class, and suddenly you feel like you belong and you're feeling really connected, and you're still in that state when then you go back to work or you go home and you interact with the other people in your lives. And I think it's fascinating to think about that you could go exercise, go move, and put yourself in a biological state that primes you to be, not just to be more social, but to really appreciate that connection and the other people in your lives. And so I wanted to start with that because I feel like I'd never heard anyone talk about that except sort of casually, and to have a kind of scientific understanding for how it's happening. And in a way, I think it's an important lesson because, I hear from a lot of people that they feel selfish for taking time, say, to go to a yoga class or to go for a walk, that they're taking time away from their families, and or maybe they're taking time away from work, and it's really important to be there and give it their all. And if you think that this movement session is actually priming you to be a better parent or a better partner or a better leader or a better team member, it's not selfish. It's actually, it may be a gift to the people in your lives.
That's so fascinating. I always think of movement and exercise as a way to sort of go inward and connect more with myself and my own body. But it's fascinating to hear that it's also very directly a way that helps us to connect with others.
Yeah, and of course it's both. And that's what's so wonderful about it, because you can have that. And what's really fascinating about it is that you can have that social benefit even if you're moving alone, even if you're doing your own personal practice, or you're in the gym with your headphones on, listening to music that you love. You don't necessarily have to do social movement in order to experience the social benefits. Although, maybe we'll talk about this, there are some extra social benefits from moving in groups.
Yeah, that'd be great to hear about. I know you've been a group fitness teacher for a long time. And so how does this work differently when we're actually running in a group or in a group fitness class?
Yeah, so it's funny because, I love group fitness in a way that is hard to explain to people who don't do group fitness. I think often when I tell people like I love aerobics, people are like, you're crazy. That's like, it looks from the outside, it looks insane. It looks ridiculous. They have like a bunch of people all moving their hands at the same time and clapping and woohooing. It looks ridiculous. And many people feel like you couldn't drag me into a class. But when you're actually in it, it seems to just activate this basic human instinct to move in synchrony in groups. And so one of the things that I've been really exploring on the research side is this amazing body of research looking at an effect called social synchrony, that what happens in our brains and in our bodies and in our relationships when we move at the same time with other people, often to music. Music enhances it. And it seems like we as sort of humans, we evolved to form social relationships through synchronized movement. And that sort of the easiest way to express it in modern life is something like group fitness, where you're step touching, or you're all lifting weights at exactly the same time to the beat of the music. Or you're, in a running group and you're running together and you're sort of synchronizing your pace and your breathing. And who knows how it sort of the original form, whether it was dancing around a fire or whether it was, working together to process the food that you gathered that day or to build structures. But it seems like we have this instinct to really derive pleasure from moving at the same time with other people. And some of the greatest research on this is coming out of Oxford, a researcher named Bronwyn Tarr, who has actually made people move together in synchrony to music and measured things like endorphins and pain tolerance and social cohesion, and found that when you take strangers and you bring them together and have them do simple movements together, sometimes as simple as sitting in a chair, and they're literally just doing, slow arm movements synchronized together, all the way up to these fantastic dance routines that people are doing together, sort of more like a flash mob, that any kind of synchronized movement, that what you see is the brain starts to release higher levels of endorphins, which is one of the primary ways that we bond with people we aren't related to and we aren't mating with. Sort of like this, endorphins are actually a social bonding chemical that, we often talk about oxytocin, for example, is really important for building bonds. And oxytocin is really good for close bonds, with your kids, with your partner, with your close friends. But endorphins seem to underlie our ability to form social bonds with friend groups, so sort of broad social support networks. And when you move together in synchrony, you get this flood of endorphins so that when you look out at who you're moving with, you're like, I like these people. Oh, wow, I belong in this group. And that seems to translate into people actually saying, I trust these people more, I like them more, I feel more similar to them, I enjoy being around them. And that translates also into a sense of actually being willing to provide support. It becomes like a real social support network, the people that you move with. And again, the idea is that we evolved this. It's an adaptive ability to form tribes. And one of the things that I love about group fitness, and I've seen this happen in all sorts of movement forms, from yoga to dance, is that people do form tribes and they feel like it's an important community where they're welcomed and they show up and they feel good about being there. And that often when things become difficult in their lives, that social support network actually steps up. And that was one of the most beautiful things about writing this book, was asking for examples of that. And some of the examples that people gave me about how sort of almost like random strangers that they've been exercising with at a group fitness studio, for the past year. One of the stories that I write about was a woman who ended up needing open heart surgery. And it was her fitness community that really helped hold her through, like sending her playlists from class that she was able to, when she had to learn how to walk again. And she's walking in the hallway in the hospital, dragging her IV stand, and she's in so much pain. But she's getting these text messages of support from her group fitness community and listening to playlists from class, so she can imagine them being there with her and cheering her on in the way that they cheer one another on when they're doing a sprint in the exercise class. That ended up being more meaningful for her than some like traditional forms of support. And I think that's one way, it's one reason why I feel so privileged to be able to teach group fitness, because I see that sort of thing build over time.
So are the effects, you were speaking about just any sort of movement being very beneficial for our own mood and well-being, and also for connection with others. And then, in these group movement situations, are the effects, besides the people that are in the room, are they amplified or different than exercising alone or moving alone?
Yeah, it's interesting. So one thing that it seems to be true is that you form really nice bonds with the people that you exercise with. There's some studies showing that if you move in synchrony with other people, and you feel connected to them, and then you're in a situation where a stranger needs help, you're actually more likely to help that stranger as well. So there's some evidence that it generalizes. Now that could be sort of the runner's high effect too. It could be that it's not just the endorphins you're getting from social synchrony, but maybe the endocannabinoids as well, and the sort of general feel better effect, that you're more likely to be this optimistic, engaged version of yourself. But so there is some evidence that moving in groups can sort of make you better able to connect outside of that. But there's something very powerful about moving in groups. And one of the other effects that you see in the literature is something that's called we agency, like WE-agency. We often talk about agency as a sense of self-empowerment and autonomy. Like if I have a sense of agency, it means I feel like I can go out and do what's important to me, and I can make choices in my life that help create conditions that I want and I value. So we agency is the felt sense that you as a community or you as a collective have the power to do things that are important to you. And moving in groups seems to produce that kind of sense of we agency that is really important for psychological well-being above and beyond kind of personal agency, particularly for people who are doing things that involve working together in groups. So there's interesting research showing that, for example, when you participate in a charity walk or a charity swim or bike ride, that you actually feel much more optimistic about your community's ability to, say, end violence or find a cure for cancer, or whatever the intention of that fundraising event is, or awareness event is, that you feel more optimistic about it. You feel like you better understand your role in this sort of big challenge. You're more likely to believe that it's a solvable problem rather than unsolvable. And you're even more likely to believe that people, if there is like another side, I mean, you're not going to ascribe positive motivations to cancer, but if it's like a political or social issue, you're more likely to view others as having good intentions and there being a possible collaborative solution, which is really important when you're trying to change the world. And so there's something about moving together in groups that gives us this kind of collective version of that feel better effect that I mentioned earlier, that like when you move, you feel better able to handle the challenges in your lives. You feel like you have more energy. You feel more hopeful and optimistic, but it's sort of like a you package. And moving together in groups creates it at the collective level. And I think it's another benefit of group fitness, but it's also really important when you think about groups who are working together to solve difficult problems. There's a reason why when leaders go on retreat somewhere for some like team building thing, it's really helpful to have movement as part of that. One of the women that I wrote about in the book does dance activism for people who are activists and helps them dance as a way of restoring hope and restoring a sense of collective efficacy in situations where it's very easy to despair or to become burned out.
I'm guessing that there are people that are watching that are regularly going to yoga classes or group fitness or going for runs by themselves or with groups, and maybe some others that are not doing as many of those things. I'm wondering if you have any suggestions both for how to get started and how to further this exploration.
Yeah, I should probably like bracket this into like 3 key points. And I want to start with one that is, I think, the most important, and that's the mindset that you bring to movement. So there's a lot of pressure and a lot of sort of messaging in our culture that movement is about fixing a body that is socially unacceptable, that your size is wrong, your strength or shape is wrong, you look old, you shouldn't look this way, you need to change your body in some way, and that if you move, you will make your body more socially acceptable, more socially desirable, and you'll live longer. But let's face it, most of the messaging is not even about the living longer part. And it turns out that when you come to movement with those motivations, appearance goals, fixing a body that you feel is stigmatized by others or even by yourself, it starts to wipe out a lot of the benefits we've been talking about. It is a major barrier, and it's it's a barrier to the mood effects as well. It doesn't completely eliminate them, but if you are moving and the whole time you're thinking, I hate my, fill in your body part, or you are aware that other people are watching you and you are, imagining what they might be thinking or judging about your body while they're watching you, that is going to really interfere with some of the psychological benefits, and it really interferes with the social benefits as well. So this is not something that's really a do-it-yourself project only. I spend a lot of time trying to talk to people in the fitness world and in the yoga world about radically changing the way they talk about why we're doing these things and the way we talk about people's bodies and the assumptions we make. But to some degree, it can be a do-it-yourself project in that if you have come to movement from this perspective of sort of buying into the idea that the reason you move is to change something that is unacceptable about your body, to think, what would it be like if I instead said, this is the pursuit of happiness. This is the pursuit of social connection. I'm moving because I'm human, and my brain has evolved to take joy in movement and to move in communities. And I'm bringing the body I have, and I'm leaving with the body I have. And the benefits of movement are completely independent from whether it shrinks my whatever or, whether I lose weight. It is not even in the way that I think about movement. And I really think people just need to put that aside and to really look at the most powerful effects of movement, which are, there's the physical benefits, but the psychological and social are overwhelming, and they're available to everyone and don't require changing your body or having a particular body. So that's the first thing, is like we as a culture and as individuals need to try to radically change that mindset and conversation. The second thing I would say is to know that you are going to bond with people you move with, and to think about like, what kind of community do you want? And when you are looking for a place, if you're not currently practicing, or if you are currently practicing or exercising in a community, to look around at the individuals, to look around at the values of the organization, what are the values you see expressed there, and to think like, is this the community that I want for myself? And are these the people I want to feel bonded to? And that should be a big determinant of other than if there's childcare and can you get there in time, without spending an hour driving each way. I mean, there are practical things, but to also give yourself permission to say, I'm looking for a community I'm going to be proud to belong to, and I'm going to bring my full self to that community, knowing that you also will become a resource and perhaps a positive influence to the other people in that community. And that may be more important than the type of movement you're doing. That maybe you end up joining a kickball league. There's this whole movement now towards like recreational sports and like old school gym class sports, the kind of things I was traumatized by, like trampoline dodgeball I was reading. I don't know, it sounds like a nightmare to me, but you know what, with the right people, I bet it could be really amazing. And so maybe it doesn't start with, I think I want to do strength training, but it turns out the community that you really would benefit most from is a Zumba class, to really, give yourself permission to look at community first, and then allow the movement to become something that is more enjoyable. And the other thing that I want to say is to recognize that it takes courage to go into a group environment. It's part of why this whole thing is so powerful, because we're social creatures and we want to belong. And, even me as somebody who teaches group fitness, and I've done group fitness all over the world. When I travel, I often look for a studio. I often don't speak the language. I'm like, hey, I'm doing my best in the back. Because it's such a fun way to feel like you belong in a new city or a new country. But even I feel tremendous anxiety when I'm going into a new place. Like, will I be able to keep up? Is my body going to betray me by not being able to do whatever I'm asked to do? And so to know that, like, as somebody who's made this my profession feels that way, I think most people are probably feeling something like that when they go into a new environment. And to not let that become an overwhelming barrier, just sort of acknowledge the reason that I'm feeling some anxiety is because the part of me that wants to belong is showing up. That is the part of me who will benefit from social connections. And it's also, maybe it's a part of me that's a little bit protective, practicing some self-care and self-kindness. Like if I enter a new space and I'm not welcomed, or I find that the values are not consistent with mine, that it's helpful to have a part of you who's going to say, you know what, you don't have to be here. You have options, and to go find the tribe that really is your tribe, and to sort of accept that as part of the process.
I love that. Thank you. I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit too about the mindset that we bring to movement, as far as this week is called Mindful Living Week, and how we engage with movement. We're really paying attention to the way that we're connecting with our bodies versus something where we might be sort of out of body, or how that plays all of this.
Well, so when it comes to the psychological benefits of exercise, there are positive effects from both association. That's sort of what you're describing, the mindful. In the sort of the sports or fitness world, they talk about it as you are associating your attention with what's really happening in the moment physically. And then there's dissociation. And that, in a psychological term, that sounds terrible, like you're dissociating from your body. But actually, there can be some real benefits to that. And that's where you see things like the power of music. So for example, if you're doing physical therapy and it's really painful and uncomfortable, and yet somebody brings in music that inspires you, that you associate with sort of narratives and stories that are meaningful to you, or positive memories in your past, and you dissociate a little bit in that way from the feelings of discomfort in your body, is a different kind of mindfulness. It's more like when you started, you decided, I need to do this movement to take care of myself. This is part of my process of change and healing. It's going to be uncomfortable. That's the mindful choice. And then you put yourself in a context where maybe you have people supporting you, and that allows a little bit of dissociation. And you're listening to music you love, and that allows a little bit of dissociation, so that your brain is paying less attention to signals of discomfort. That actually can be a form of mindful movement. I want to give a nod to that, because sometimes we too narrowly define what mindfulness is as like, I have to pay attention just to what's in my inner container right now. And mindfulness can be so much more than that. That said, there actually is a lot of benefit to paying attention to what's happening in your body, particularly when you're not in a situation where you have to overcome physical pain, like in physical therapy. Like when it's just sort of normal, ordinary levels of both discomfort and pleasure that come from walking or hiking or dancing or yoga. Most movement forms have that interesting mix of, ooh, this feels good, that feels hard. And to turn our attention to all of those sensations, to start to sense our own heart rate, to start to sense our breathing, to feel the sweat on our skin. That what that seems to do is actually shift the brain's sort of default state into a state of mind that feels, I don't know if calmer is the right word, but a lot of the normal mental suffering that's in there, that chatter, it gets cleared away and it gets replaced by sensory information about what's happening in this moment. It's one of the reasons people love yoga, because there's such a flood of sensory information. And if you're doing yoga in an appropriate way, a lot of that sensory feedback actually is pleasurable rather than painful. And when you choose to pay attention to it, that sensory information can just crowd out a lot of the other stuff that our minds do by default, by habit, whether it's, worrying, or whether it's, judging other people. So whatever's in there just gets replaced with, I feel my breath, I feel my legs, I feel what's happening in my body. And that's one of the benefits of mindful movement. It may actually train you to be able to do that in other moments as well, to sort of choose to just, slightly move aside the usual mental chatter. Yeah.
I'm wondering, as you're diving into the research on movement, if you're seeing any interesting connections with all of the research that you've done on stress.
Oh, yes. It is amazing how regular physical movement changes our normal response to stress. It's something I wanted to write about in my last book, but as one of my teachers once said to me, Kelly, you can't say everything you know all the time. And I had to leave out anything really about exercise in that book on stress. But the truth is that if you want to change the way you respond to stress, exercise is probably the best, if not one of the best. It probably is just the best way to do it. And I'll just give you an example. So in my last book, I talk about the difference between fight or flight response and a challenge response. And a challenge response is a healthier way of responding to normal, ordinary, everyday stress. It's physiologically different. You have less inflammation. It's a healthier state. And it also empowers you more to be really skillful in how you respond to everyday stress. So a lot of what I talked about previously was mindsets that can help you have a challenge response. But it turns out that people who regularly exercise are more likely to have a challenge response by default because they're having a challenge response when they exercise. It actually is teaching the whole stress circuitry in the brain and in the nervous system. This is how we handle stress. Our heart beats faster to give us energy. Our blood vessels relax to send that energy to the brain and the body. We keep levels of inflammation in check. We feel good about what we're doing. We can even take some joy in it. And people start to have that kind of default response to conflict at work or something that gives you a little bit of anxiety. I think that's fascinating because you don't have to do anything at that point. It's like you just change your default. And there's a whole other body of research that also shows you can actually you can change the way you respond to future stress by moving. And I'm going to tell you about a study that did not make it into the book because I couldn't figure out where to put it. And it is living in me. Like I need to share it. So I'm going to share it with anyone watching today. There's a chemical that you can inject into people's bloodstream that gives them a panic attack. It gives almost everyone a panic attack, not just people with panic disorder or anxiety. You can literally inject panic into the bloodstream of people, and it happens almost immediately. And that's one way that scientists study panic attacks. And you see it in the brain, you see it in the heart rate. I mean, it's like legit, guaranteed you're going to have a panic attack. And there are studies showing that if you have people walk for, I think it's maybe 20 or 30 minutes before you inject them, you can almost completely eliminate that effect. And people are not having panic attacks. You can literally create a state in your mind and body that is defending against panic being injected into your bloodstream. And there's a whole lot of research like that when you have recently moved your body, who you are when you encounter stress is different. And your brain and body are just empowered to handle it differently. That study is so crazy to me. It works better than giving people anti-anxiety medications, like the kind of things you get a prescription for. That can also prevent this chemical-induced panic attack. But exercise does it at least as well or better without the same side effects. I think to me that just is beginning to illustrate how little we understand about how important movement is to being flourishing human beings. And if we are lucky enough to have bodies that can move, for any part of our bodies, maybe you can't move your whole body, but if you can move any part of your body, to be grateful for that and to not throw away the opportunity we have to reshape our neurochemistry and to strengthen relationships with others, and to stop thinking of movement as this chore we have to do to lower our blood pressure or lose weight. It's so much more than that. And it's so deeply integrated in what it means to be a flourishing human being.
That's amazing. And that's just 20 to 30 minutes of walking. So you don't have to go to a Zumba class.
You don't have to, but you can come to my Zumba class if you want.
I would like to do that. And so I think we're coming to the end of our time. Is there anything else that you'd like to offer? If you had one thing that you'd like the audience to remember today about what we spoke about, what would it be?
Yeah, one thing I probably didn't emphasize enough is that that it's not the type of movement and it's not the intensity of movement that matters. In the book, I talk to so many people who have physical limitations, whether they are partially paralyzed, whether they have movement disorders. I went to a wonderful class for people with Parkinson's disease, people with cerebellar ataxia, which makes all movements difficult. It's true, even people in hospice care. All over the world, there are people who are exercising in hospice care. They know that they are not going to cure their cancer or whatever their condition is by exercising. And they are taking joy in what they can do. And they are appreciating their bodies in that one moment. I wish that people could come to view movement as such a gift and such a blessing, and to be able to view it almost as embracing life, and to do it for yourself and to do it with other people, and to not let either messages from the media or the culture about what movement means, not to let that get in the way, and also to make peace with your body wherever it is, and know that if anything can move, anything's still moving, your lungs, your face, your hands, that you can benefit from moving for yourself and moving in communities.
Well, thank you so much. This was a pleasure speaking with you, and I'm really excited that we'll all be able to see this as a part of the event. And good luck with your new book. I'm definitely going to check it out. Does it have a name yet?
It doesn't. It's not going to be out for a long time. So don't wait. Go for a walk now.
All right. Take care.
Bye.